you familiar with the adage that there are decades where nothing happens, and then there's weeks where pretty much decades happen? And this is very much true for any kind of technology. I mean, if you look at, especially the last 5-6 decades, starting from now, roughly every 10 years or so, we see a major paradigm shift, and that's all. And money also being a technology, we see that. I mean, if you look at the evolution of technology, I was just telling my kid a couple of weeks ago that back when I was his age, he's a teenager, 12 years old, I would take the train to the city, I would go to the National Library, go through like hundreds of microfilms, look up whatever I wanted to look up for, and after a whole day at the library, I would have my answer. So for him to do that, he just asks Siri. It takes him 5 seconds, and he probably gets 10 times better results than I would get back then, spending all day. So typically, whenever a new paradigm when we had a new paradigm shift in technology, it is usually met by resistance. We ask ourselves, do we really need this new thing? Do we really need this new kind of technology? And this are, for example, actual anti-propaganda posters from when electricity was introduced. They're warning people about the horrors and the dangers of this new technology. Candles were fine. Why do we need electricity in our homes? The horse and buggies were okay. The trains are killers, and so it's a typical reaction of reacting to anything that's new. And money actually being just the same. It's a technology like anything else. So there's nothing new. Let's just see my t-shirt too. I made this one by accident, actually. So if you look at the history of money across the world, we have had countless, like really literally the hundreds or thousands of different currencies that have been there and disappeared. I mean, it's very cyclical like everything else. And typically you will see a civilization flourishing. They come in, the new conquerors, they come in with culture because they have sound money that historically was always based in precious metals. But after a generation, the children of the conquerors start resting on the laurels of the conquerors. After that, you would have second generation forgetting why actually this civilization was built on, what it was built on. They start debasing the currency. Like in Roman times, you see clipping, when they start clipping away on the precious metals of the coins, or mixing in metals with the gold. So what happens? People get unhappy, their money is losing their value. The army starts weakening as soldiers start deserting. Until the next conqueror come in, they take everything, they take the cities, they take the debased money, and it starts all over again. In fact, when von Schlemmer discovered ancient Troy, he discovered 9 different ancient Troys, really built on top of each other. And I mean, it kind of makes sense, this looks like a good place to build a city. It flourishes for a couple of hundred years. The next conquerors come in, they burn it to the ground. They say, hey, this looks like a nice place to build a city, and the cycle repeats over and over again. But throughout history, the one common point that we see that we are always, and that's human nature, looking for the pursuit of happiness. This never really changes. We essentially want to be happy. That doesn't work in that way. However, and we see this especially in the past century, when the fruit of your labor, like really the effort of your life, is really expressed in a currency, in our case now, in our kind of paradigm based on fiat currency that is by design going towards zero, this pursuit of happiness becomes very difficult. It's very, very hard to really have a meaningful kind of hope in your life. And it actually it's a feeling of despair, So this is kind of the situation we find ourselves in right now, more than ever in recent memory. And then along comes Satoshi, some 14, 15 years ago, with his white paper. And in January 4th, 2009, he unleashes this monetary virus onto the world. And people initially start asking themselves, so what is this new thing? Kind of a gimmicky thing. Do we really need this? What is this Bitcoin thing? So it's, of course, again, this new paradigm is met with skepticism and a lot of questions. So nobody really paid too much attention to it, except for a community of really geeks and idealists. And then 2020 happened. What happened in 2020? Things kind of started taking a turn there. Up to this point, where would people store their wealth? Could have precious metals, currencies, watches, properties, or collectibles. But the models we knew all the way up to that point, suddenly no longer, they're not valid anymore. And I'll come back to this in a minute or two. What if you can encrypt $1 billion into monetary energy, send it across the world peer-to-peer instantly, without trust? This is the new question we ask ourselves. Do we really need this? Because we live in a time where trust really becomes very difficult. We're looking more and more for trusted systems. Trust in institutions, trust in governments are really at an all-time low right now, especially after the past 3-4 years, what we're going through right now. So, to come back to 2020, and I kind of cherry-picked this date since March 2020, March 12th. That was that infamous day when all the markets started crashing. If you've been in any kind of markets, crypto or legacy, you may remember we call it this big Corona crash, where everything suddenly crashed down because central banks started realizing, oh, we got this pandemic happening across the world, we're going to start basically printing unlimited money. And since that point, and it's kind of an easy point to pick because everything was low. Pretty much anything you threw your money at that moment is up exponentially. So gold since that point is up 32%. We have, if my clicker works, the S&P is up 74%. Nasdaq pretty much doubled since then. Bitcoin is up about 700%. At its peak, I mean, we kind of went through a peak, as we know, it was up 1,600%. And if I had done this presentation actually about 4 or 5 months ago, because the last 5 months have been exponential for the markets, gold was actually down 18%. The S&P was slightly up, and the Nasdaq was just barely breaking even. What if you say, well, you're investing in stocks? Google is up now over 100%, Apple up almost 200%, Amazon 50%, Facebook 81%, Netflix 36%, and MicroStrategy, to come back to Michael Saylor, up 270%. This is your company on a Bitcoin standard. Because what MicroStrategy did, they were sitting about $500 million in cash, and he started realizing how the money really was losing its value as he's looking at it. He was giving this analogy of a melting ice cube. So this is really your family. This is your life or your company on a Bitcoin standard. And again, if I had done this presentation 6 months ago, roughly, Google, my examples, I think was up roughly 30%, Apple about 20%, Amazon was actually down 30%, Facebook 40%, and Netflix was down over 50%. So the last few months have done really, we've seen a massive pump in the markets. So to come back to the models that I mentioned a minute ago, so these models no longer hold true. What were these models? We always knew exactly what to do. All the way to 1917, Bretton Woods, there was a model that worked, that we understood. Then until 71, there was a certain model. And all the way to 2020, the typical model have a 60-40 kind of ratio portfolio, invest in bonds, and then 40% in S&P with a balanced portfolio. But even, just about a week ago, Grayscale came out with this article that this particular 60-40 model is no longer valid. And they even mentioned that any kind of portfolio, not including Bitcoin, will not be feasible in any kind of measure. So since that point, people start realizing, so this Bitcoin thing that kind of appeared in the world, we kind of have to deal with it now. So you see institutions like Fidelity putting 34 million accounts onto a Bitcoin. Government starting dealing with it. You see in US congressmen and senators dealing with it, trying to figure out regulation on Bitcoin. You have seen El Salvador putting Bitcoin as legal tender. And in fact, as a bit mentioned earlier, Bitcoin has pretty much been part of the Liberland story from day one. But we let El Salvador have it, so we're not going to make too much noise about it. So, but we've pretty much been on the Bitcoin standard since day one. We've seen institutional investors now, really they cannot be relevant in the market anymore without including Bitcoin. We've seen media that all the way until 2020, they're kind of mocking Bitcoin, not taking it seriously, and you cannot watch CNBC for 10 minutes without any kind of mention of a cryptocurrency. Deutsche Bank, and that's very recent, about a month ago, applied for Bitcoin custody licenses. And of course, the big one right now that everybody talks about is BlackRock, which is pretty much the biggest institutional investor on the planet. They have $10 trillion of assets under management. They are currently in the process of applying for a Bitcoin ETF. So at the beginning of about 10 years ago, 14 years ago, when Bitcoin appeared on the market, it sparked a little flame. But what happened now, after 2020, we started pouring gasoline on the plane, on this flame. And what does this mean? I mean, for many people, they may not feel the effect that's happening in the world. If you're a trust fund baby living in upstate New York, or you may be fine. But for most people, it's a different story. If you live in the US, for example, this gasoline over the fire represents the tripling of the inflation rate just within a couple of years. I mean, in your life, it becomes much more expensive. Gas prices, food prices. Yeah. If you live in Argentina, you saw the value of your peso going from 20 to 1 to $2 to 280 to 1 to the dollar within 4 years. If you lived in Sri Lanka, you see basically you lost everything. The government lost everything, complete chaos. If you lived in Lebanon, you wake up one morning and you see your money is no longer in the banks. And it went to this point that people would break into banks, holding hostages at gunpoint, just demanding their own money back. Just imagine that. If you lived in Zimbabwe, I mean, everybody's seen this $100 trillion note. I mean, I can only imagine what must have happened to go to this kind of denomination of the value. I mean, this is extreme to the extreme. If you lived in Venezuela, and as you remember, Venezuela used to be one of the wealthiest nations in the world, but it got so bad that people wouldn't even bother picking up the money of the streets anymore. They started getting creative with it otherwise. If you live in the Ukraine, you realize suddenly one day why you can't move your money around anymore. If you live in Russia, you realize that the assets you thought you owned, the yachts, the apartments, the bank accounts you thought you had overseas, suddenly are no longer yours. So in order to preserve your wealth, you need to convert your currency into assets that are scarce, desirable, portable, durable, and maintainable. So it's very difficult to find one asset to really fulfill all these criteria. Real estate, like a beachfront property, for example, may be scarce and desirable, but is it portable? And even maintainable? I mean, if you, for example, have a $1 million property in Miami, you need another million at least just to maintain it over a span of 10 years in terms of property taxes and maintenance. So you gotta be a smart investor. This is the smart investor, who is bragging that he made money in the stock market. And actually all they did really is pick a few companies that made some good decisions. But if you look closely, all this does really, if you look at the increase of the money supply, with the green line there, all you've done really is tracking the rate of the money supply increasing. So all you've done is keeping up inflation, if you're lucky. So you broke even. So what is money? Well, money, ideally, is the ability to preserve the fruit of your labor, economic energy that you sweat for, without it having stolen by a government, by inflation, or by a bad investment decision. Gold at best it's aspirational, but it's defective. Why is that? Because you can always mine more gold, Right now, gold increases at a rate of about 2 to 3% per year, which means the half-life of gold is about 36 years, meaning the value of your money in gold loses half of it in relation to inflation every 36 years or so. In order to make gold perfect money, you have to stop mining it. You stop mining it, putting it algorithmically onto your brain and move it on, but that's never going to happen. We know that. It is difficult to create sound money. How much more difficult? Well, Bitcoin became 50 trillion times more difficult to create since its inception 14 years ago. 50 trillion times. So while the world during the past 10 years was kind of mocking this kind of fringe Bitcoin thing, these Bitcoin people figured out how to create 50 trillion times more work to creating the same Bitcoin. In order to make to have sound money, you need to make it infinitely scarce. And if you make it scarce, you have to put a cap on it, cap on how you're building it. That's why commodities make really awful money. Why is that? Because when you look at commodities, you're betting against human intellect. You don't want to bet on human intellect, because there's always going to be somebody with less money than you who's going to figure out how to take it away from you. You can put your money in all kinds of assets, as we have, but every one of these assets has a natural frequency. Oil, for example, has a very, very fast frequency. The peso doubles in supply every 2 to 3 years. Silver is mined at a very fast rate. The dollar increases roughly at 7% per year, which means the half-life of the dollar is roughly 10 years. Which means every 10 years, the supply of the dollar doubles. Gold, as we just mentioned earlier, has a half-life of 36 years. But Bitcoin had a very high frequency at the beginning. If by next year's halving, roughly, the half-life of your money, if you put it in Bitcoin, is about 120 years. By the year 2036, the half-life of your economic money, of your economic value in Bitcoin is going to be 1,000 years. And by the year 2048, the half-life of your money in Bitcoin will be 10,000 years. But this is monetary, what's the word I'm looking for? Immortality. And governments will tell you this is impossible. Commodities will tell you this is impossible. But look at this chart, For the first time ever, you have an asset where you can escape the misery of having your entire wealth taken away, and you have actually something that you can resist against this desperation of that we alluded to in the beginning. When flow goes to zero, stock to flow goes to infinity, and your money lasts forever. And when your money lasts forever, you have hope. So what is the winning strategy? Well, the winning strategy is to hold the best money. You can hold the dollar or fiat currency, which, as we know, goes pretty fast to zero by design. Gold is a little better. You can invest in stocks that are a little better than gold, or you can hold Bitcoin. To put it slightly differently, as an example, if you hold $1 million in cash today and you want to hold it for 100 years, 100 years from now, at the current rate of inflation, that $1 million is going to be worth roughly 1,000. So it's a factor by 1,000. You put it in bonds, that $1 million, 100 years from now, at minus kind of a 3% inflation rates, can be worth about $30,000. If you invest in the S&P, which is at current rates going to make you 7% per year, but minus inflation, you're going to have roughly the same amount 100 years from now. If the S&P, if you invest half in S&P and Bitcoin, you're going to have $500 million. And if you put your $1 million in Bitcoin, you're going to be a billionaire 100 years from now. Or your kids. I don't think you're going to be around that long. So no country can stop inflation. 99% of companies cannot outrun inflation. People cannot outrun inflation. If I put you in charge of the world, you cannot stop inflation. 1% with skill and luck may be able to break even. Don't assume you're going to be part of the 1%, but everybody can buy Bitcoin. So buy Bitcoin.